You don't think about the family, my son-in-law yelled, throwing a plate at my head during Thanksgiving dinner. I refused to give up my house to his parents, and my daughter coldly added, "You'd better leave." Imagine, I was in my own home, and they were traitors masquerading as loved ones. I smiled, got up, and left. I wrote to my lawyer. Our plan worked. 5 minutes later, the police arrived. The revenge of justice had just begun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The turkey looked perfect, golden skin glistening under my dining room chandelier. I carried it to the table on the platter my late wife had bought 30 years ago, back when Thanksgiving meant laughter instead of this suffocating tension. Dewey had already claimed my seat at the head of the table. My seat, the one I'd sat in for 3 decades. He sprawled there like he owned the place, wineglass in hand, watching me set the bird down with that smirk he thought passed for charm. "Beautiful house, Ellis," he said, cutting into the turkey with exaggerated force. The knife scraped against bone. "Shame it's so empty most of the time. All these bedrooms, just you rattling around." I took my place at the side, a guest in my own home. Lula sat across from me, studying her plate like it held answers. She hadn't hugged me when she arrived, hadn't said much beyond a mumbled greeting. "I'm comfortable here," I said, keeping my voice level. "Built a life in these walls." Randall, Dewey's father, cleared his throat. "We've been looking at apartments, Ellis. 1 bedrooms, mostly. Market's tight right now." He said it casually, but his timing was too perfect. "Rehearsed." Beverly touched her husband's hand with practiced sympathy. A sigh escaped her lips. Dewey leaned forward, elbows on the table. "My parents are looking at tiny apartments while you've got 4 bedrooms collecting dust. Doesn't seem right." There it was. The real reason for this gathering. I'd suspected something like this for months. The comments Dewey dropped about property values, about my age, about how I didn't need so much space. But suspecting and experiencing are different animals. "Your parents' housing situation isn't something I'm prepared to discuss tonight," I said. Dewey's jaw tightened. He refilled his wineglass, the bottle clinking against the rim. "Not prepared? We're family. Or doesn't that mean anything to you anymore?" He paused, looking at Lula. She finally raised her eyes from her plate. "Dewey has a point, Dad," she said quietly. "We should at least talk about it." The words landed like stones in my chest. Not the content. I'd expected pressure, but the tone. Cold. Distant. This was my daughter, the girl I'd raised alone after her mother died, the one I'd put through law school, and she was siding with him. I excused myself to the kitchen, needing a moment away from Dewey's increasingly aggressive stare. Standing at the counter, I gripped the granite edge until my knuckles went white, breathed, counted to 10. I'd spent 30 years as a prosecutor, reading rooms, reading people, building cases. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an ambush. When I returned, Dewey had moved on to his second helping, talking between bites about family obligations, about elder care, about how selfish people hoard resources while loved ones struggle. "How's work, Lula?" I asked, trying to redirect. Dewey interrupted before she could answer. "We're discussing something important here, Ellis. Family takes care of family. My parents took care of me. You should understand that. You raised Lula alone." "Which is why I understand the value of independence," I said. Beverly dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Randall put his arm around her shoulders. The performance was almost convincing. The next hour crawled by with increasing tension. Dewey grew louder with each glass of wine. His compliments about the neighborhood came wrapped in commentary about how I didn't appreciate what I had, about waste, about responsibility. Lula remained silent mostly, but when she spoke, it was always in support of Dewey's points, never mine. I watched her lean into him, touch his arm when he grew animated, mirror his body language. She'd made her choice before she walked through my door tonight. Maybe months ago, maybe longer. Around 8 o'clock, as darkness settled outside the windows, Dewey pushed back from the table. His chair scraped across the hardwood floor with a harsh screech. He stood, looking down at me, his face flushed from wine and frustration. "Let me make this crystal clear," he said, his voice tight. "You're living in denial. One person doesn't need this much space. It's wasteful. It's selfish." I remained seated, hands folded on the table, met his eyes without flinching. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though I knew. "I'm suggesting you be reasonable," Dewey said, his fists clenched at his sides. "We're family, Ellis. Start acting like it." The threat hung in the air between us. Beverly looked at Randall. Randall looked at his son. Lula stared at her hands, saying nothing, which said everything. I stayed perfectly still, outwardly calm, but my mind was working through scenarios, calculating angles, preparing for what came next. Because this wasn't over. This was just beginning. Dewey's patience, what little he'd pretended to have, evaporated. He jabbed his finger toward me like a weapon. "Let me make this simple," he said, his voice rising. "You're one person. My parents are getting older. They need space. They need family around them. This house, your house, solves everything. You move to a reasonable apartment, something manageable, and my parents move in here. Temporarily, just until they get settled." Temporarily? The word carried as much truth as his smile. I looked up at him without rising from my chair. "This is my house. I worked 30 years for it. The answer is no." The room went still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Dewey's face darkened to a deep red. 30 years? And what about U.S.? What about your daughter? Don't you care about family, or are you just another selfish— His hand shot out, grabbed the edge of his dinner plate. The motion was so fast I saw it coming, but didn't react, didn't duck, just watched as the ceramic disc flew across the space between us. The plate caught me on the right temple. A sharp crack. Pain exploded through my skull like lightning. The plate shattered on the floor behind me, fragments skittering across the hardwood. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I sat perfectly still, feeling the heat spread across my temple, the immediate swelling, the pulse of my heartbeat suddenly loud in my injured head. My hand rose carefully to touch the spot. No blood on my fingers when I pulled them away, but the pain radiated in waves. Beverly gasped. Randall half rose from his seat, then settled back down. Dewey stood frozen, his arms still extended from the throw, his expression shifting rapidly from rage to shock to something that might have been fear. Lula's hand had flown to cover her mouth, but she didn't stand, didn't come to me, didn't move at all. I pressed my fingers gently against the injury, assessing it with the clinical detachment I'd learned in courtrooms. The skin wasn't broken, but I could feel the swelling already beginning, the heat of the bruise forming. This would mark, this would document well. The silence stretched. I tested moving my jaw, turning my head slightly. Everything functioned, though each movement sent fresh spikes of pain through my temple. Then Lula spoke. Her voice was flat, cold, completely devoid of concern. "Dad, you should leave. We need to discuss this without you. Just go." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Dewey, what did you do?" Just an order to leave my own house while my temple throbbed, and her husband stood there having just assaulted me. I looked at her, really looked, searched for any trace of the daughter I'd raised, the girl who used to climb into my lap after nightmares, who'd held my hand at her mother's funeral, found nothing but a stranger wearing her face. "I'll be leaving now," I said to no one in particular. I stood slowly, maintaining my balance despite the dizziness that washed over me. My phone lay on the table where I'd placed it before dinner. I picked it up, slid it into my pocket, walked to the door without looking back at any of them. Nobody stopped me. Nobody apologized. The only sound was my footsteps on the floor I'd refinished 5 years ago, through the entryway I'd painted last spring, past the photos on the wall of better times. The November air hit my face when I stepped outside, still warm for Texas, even at night. I walked to my car in the driveway, stood beside it for a moment, letting the evening settle around me. My temple pulsed with each heartbeat. I pulled out my phone, composed a text message with steady hands. Our plan worked. I have injury and witnesses. I sent it to Victor Hall, my attorney, my friend, the man who'd helped me prepare for exactly this scenario over the past 3 months. His response came within seconds. "Police already en route. Go to hospital. I'll meet you." I leaned against the car, allowed myself 10 seconds of reaction, let my shoulders sag, let my hand return to my temple, feeling the tender swelling, let myself acknowledge what had just happened, not just the assault, but Lula's betrayal, That hurt worse than any thrown plate. 10 seconds. Then I straightened, opened the car door, and slid behind the wheel. I started the engine, my temple pulsing with each heartbeat. The hospital was 20 minutes away. I pulled out of the driveway carefully, checking my mirrors, signaling properly, driving exactly the speed limit. Everything by the book. Everything documented, defensible, clean. In my rearview mirror, I could see lights still on in my house. My house that Dewey thought he could take. My home that Lula had asked me to leave. They'd made their move tonight, showed their hand, thought they'd cornered me. They had no idea I'd been 3 steps ahead since September, when Dewey first started circling like a shark. They didn't know about the cameras I'd installed, the recordings I'd made, the case I'd been building with Victor's help. Didn't know that tonight's dinner had gone exactly as I'd planned. The prosecutor in me smiled despite the pain. This was just the opening argument. The trial was about to begin. 20 minutes of silence and streetlights. Each red light gave me opportunity to study my reflection in the rearview mirror, the bruise already darkening from red to purple, swelling pushing my skin tight along the temple. The throbbing kept rhythm with my heartbeat, a steady percussion of evidence. Del Seaton Medical Center rose ahead, its emergency entrance bright against the night. I parked in the visitor lot, walked through automatic doors into fluorescent brightness and antiseptic air. The intake nurse took one look at my temple and moved me through triage quickly. Dr. Chen appeared within 15 minutes, young and efficient, maybe early 30s. She examined the injury with careful fingers, her touch clinical. "This is going to bruise significantly over the next 24 hours, she said, tilting my head toward better light. The impact point suggests a thrown object, not a fall. Do you want to tell me what happened? I'd prefer to save that for the police report, if that's acceptable. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition. She'd done this before, documented domestic violence, gathered evidence for cases that would end up in courtrooms I used to work in. I'll photograph from multiple angles, she said. Front, side, close-up, wide shot. Standard protocol for assault documentation. The camera flash was bright in my peripheral vision. 4 shots, each from a different perspective. She worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that photographs could make or break a case. Mild concussion, she diagnosed after additional tests. You'll need rest. Light sensitivity is normal. The headache will worsen before it improves. I nodded, filed the information away with everything else I'd need to remember. Victor arrived within 30 minutes of my text, carrying his leather portfolio like he'd just left the office. Probably had. He found me in the waiting area, sat beside me in the molded plastic chairs, and we spoke in the low tones of 2 men who'd worked together in courtrooms for decades. Medical documentation is solid, he said, reviewing the photos on his phone that Dr. Chen had sent electronically. Witnesses present. Provocation clearly from the aggressor. This is textbook assault causing bodily injury under Texas Penal Code, Section 2201. How long until they pick him up? I asked. Officers should be at your house within the hour. He made a call, stepping away briefly, speaking in clipped legal phrases I recognized as communication with law enforcement. When he returned, his expression held grim satisfaction. Detective Morgan is lead. She's good. Worked with us on the Henderson case back in '09, I remembered. Sarah Morgan, methodical investigator, early 40s now. She'd seen through more lies than most people told in a lifetime. While we waited for my discharge papers, my phone buzzed. Lula's name lit the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, holding the device slightly away from my ear. What did you do? Her voice exploded through the speaker, loud enough that Victor heard. The police arrested Dewey. You called the police on your own family. You planned this. He assaulted me in my own home, I said, my voice calm and cold. Actions have consequences. You're destroying this family. He's in handcuffs because you... I ended the call, set the phone face down on my lap. Victor raised an eyebrow. She made her choice, I said. Back at my house, my crime scene now, Detective Morgan walked through the dining room, cataloging evidence with practiced eyes. The overturned chair where Dewey had stood, the impact point on the wall where the plate had hit after grazing my temple, leaving a chip in the elegant wallpaper. Food splattered across surfaces, the broken ceramic pieces scattered like accusations across my hardwood floor. Dewey paced near the window, his movements aggressive even now. Randall and Beverly sat close together on the couch, talking over each other in nervous bursts. Lula remained at the dining table, pale and silent, her hands flat against the wood. Morgan separated them for individual statements, standard procedure. Give them time to settle into their lies before comparing stories. "Sir, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at dinner tonight," she said to Dewey, her voice neutral. "He was being unreasonable," Dewey said, his words tumbling out too fast. "My parents needed help, and he wouldn't listen to reason. He said terrible things about family." "That doesn't explain how he got injured." Dewey's mouth opened, closed, his face reddened. In the living room, Randall tried his version. "It was an accident. Things got heated. You know how family dinners can be, and he didn't mean—" Beverly interrupted, her voice rising. "Ellis said terrible things. He was refusing to help family. Dewey was defending us." Morgan's pen moved across her notepad, recording contradictions. Accidental or defensive. Provoked or unprovoked. The stories didn't align, and she knew it. Two uniformed officers flanked Dewey as Morgan read him his rights. His voice started to rise in protest, but Beverly touched his arm with a warning look. He fell silent. "Dewey Parker, you're under arrest on suspicion of assault causing bodily injury." The words continued, familiar and inevitable. Victor had forwarded the medical documentation electronically. The photographs of my darkening bruise, Dr. Chen's clinical notes. The case was building itself, brick by documented brick. Neighbors had heard the shouting. One had called about the crash. Their statements would corroborate timeline and intensity. As the officers placed handcuffs on Dewey's wrists, his eyes found where Lula sat. She looked away. My phone buzzed again in my hand at the hospital. Another call from Lula. I sent it to voicemail. Victor glanced at the screen. "She's called my office 6 times already. I'm not answering either." "Good," I said. Dr. Chen returned with discharge papers, instructions for monitoring concussion symptoms, prescription for pain medication, follow-up appointment scheduled for Monday. I signed where indicated, collected the papers, stood carefully. The dizziness had faded, but the pain remained, steady and sharp. "Your attorney mentioned you might need these for legal proceedings," Dr. Chen said, handing Victor a sealed envelope. "Complete medical records and photographs, certified copies." "Appreciated," Victor said. Outside, the night had grown cooler. Victor walked me to my car. "You should rest," he said. "This is just the beginning. Bail hearing tomorrow, probable cause determination, then we see if the DA files charges." "They'll file," I said. "Too much evidence, too many witnesses, too public now that the arrest is made." He nodded. We both knew how these cases played. Once the machinery started moving, it rarely stopped. I drove home carefully, the same route in reverse, past the hospital, through downtown, into Tarrytown. My house sat dark when I pulled into the driveway. Everyone gone. Crime scene tape across my front door. I sat in the car for a long moment, engine ticking as it cooled, looking at my home transformed into evidence. Then I got out, ducked under the tape, and went inside to spend the night alone with my throbbing temple and my calculated satisfaction. I slept poorly, waking every few hours to the pulse of pain in my temple. Morning came regardless, sunlight harsh through the windows I'd forgotten to curtain. I took the prescribed medication, made coffee in my quiet kitchen, and settled into my study with the deliberate routine of a man reclaiming his space. The house felt different, emptier. Not just from Lula's absence. I'd grown accustomed to that over the past year as she drifted toward Dewey's orbit. This was the emptiness that comes after violence, after the breaking of something that can't be repaired. I pressed the ice pack against my temple, felt the cold seep through my skin, and let myself remember how it all began. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been working in my garden, hands deep in autumn soil, pulling up the last of the season's tomato plants. The afternoon had been warm, windows open throughout the house. Dewey's voice had risen through one of them, my office window, left ajar, and I'd frozen with dirt under my fingernails. "The old man's sitting on prime real estate," Dewey had said clearly on his phone, pacing my office like he owned it. "Lula says he won't budge, but I think he just needs the right motivation. Her sentiment gets in the way, but I can handle it. Once we get him into something smaller, we can rent this place for $3,500 a month. Easy. I'd stayed crouched in my garden bed, listening to my daughter's husband calculate the financial value of displacing me from my own home. The tomato plant drooped in my hand, roots exposed, dying. That evening, after Dewey and Lula left, I'd called Victor Hall. 2 days later, I'd sat across from him in a downtown coffee shop, both of us with legal pads, sketching scenarios like we used to build prosecution strategies. "He'll escalate if he feels challenged in front of his parents," I'd observed, tapping my pen against the paper. "Needs to maintain dominance. Alpha personality with no real power backing it up. All performance." "Then we give him the audience," Victor had replied. His eyes had held the same sharp focus I remembered from case reviews. "Document everything. Make him feel cornered. He'll lash out." "You want to be absolutely certain about this?" Victor had added, setting down his pen. "Once we set it in motion, there's no walking back. Your daughter will see you as the aggressor." I'd looked out the coffee shop window at people passing by, living ordinary lives without these calculations. "She already chose sides," I'd said. "I'm just making sure the choice has consequences." Back in my study, the ice pack growing warm against my skin, I remembered how methodically we'd planned. Victor had made a call to Detective Morgan. They'd worked together when I was still prosecuting, knew each other's methods. Potential domestic situation might develop. Victor had explained to her over the phone, his voice careful. "Victim may need rapid response. Can you prioritize if we call it in?" Morgan had agreed. She'd seen too many domestic assaults where delayed response meant worse injuries or lost evidence. I'd installed a voice recorder in my living room 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Legal in Texas, one-party consent state, and it was my house. I'd tested it, made sure it captured conversation clearly from every angle of the room. The phone call to Beverly Parker had been almost pleasant. "I'd love to host you and Randall for Thanksgiving," I'd said, my tone warm and grandfatherly. "It's been too long since we had proper family time together. Lula and Dewey will be there, of course." In the background, I'd heard Dewey's voice rise with interest. Beverly had accepted immediately, practically gushing about family gatherings. I'd hung up and stared at my phone, knowing I'd just baited the trap. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Victor and I had met one final time in his office. "Morgan's on standby," he'd said, reviewing the timeline we'd constructed. "Medical center is briefed. Dr. Chen works ER domestics regularly. She'll document properly. When he moves on you, stay calm, take the hit if you can do it safely, then exit. We need documentation, not heroics." 30 years prosecuting violent offenders, I'd said. I know how they think. I know exactly how much to push before they break. Now, sitting in my study with my coffee growing cold and my temple pulsing under melting ice, I opened my laptop, pulled up the password-protected file I'd been maintaining. 3 weeks of notes, dates and times of Dewey's suspicious comments, transcripts of overheard conversations, his escalating demands disguised as suggestions, the pattern of manipulation building from subtle to overt, all documented, all time-stamped, evidence of his premeditation, not mine. I'd simply created the circumstances for him to reveal what he already was. My phone buzzed, text from Victor. "Dewey held overnight, bail hearing tomorrow, 2 p.m. Parents scrambling for money. Lula called my office 6 times, not answering." I read it twice, then typed my response. "Let them scramble. This is just beginning." I stood, moved through my house in the morning light, through the dining room where someone, Victor probably arranging a cleaning service, had removed the crime scene tape and cleaned the table. The broken ceramic was gone. The chip in the wallpaper remained, small evidence of impact. I stood where Dewey had stood, fist raised, face red with manufactured righteous anger. Everything had gone exactly as I'd predicted. He'd escalated on schedule, crossed the line from verbal to physical, right in front of witnesses, documented himself into a legal corner. The victim was always the predator. I'd just been patient enough to wait for him to prove it. Outside my window, birds moved through the bare November branches. The world continued, indifferent to human schemes and counter-schemes. I returned to my study, my coffee, my planning. Dewey's bail hearing would be tomorrow. After that, arraignment, then discovery, where he'd learn exactly how much evidence existed against him. And after that, Well, I had more moves prepared. This was only the opening. I'd spent 3 decades building cases against violent men who thought they were entitled to hurt people. I knew their patterns, their justifications, their inevitable mistakes. Dewey had walked into my courtroom without realizing it was a courtroom at all. The trial had already begun, and I'd never lost a case I'd prepared this carefully. The morning of November 30th arrived with cold clarity. I sat in my study, laptop open to the Travis County Court's online docket system, watching the case number appear. State of Texas versus Dewey Parker. The bail hearing was scheduled for mid-afternoon. Victor called at 9. "You could come," he said. "Show the judge your injury." "Better if I stay away," I replied. "Injured man, too, traumatized to face his attacker. Let the photographs speak for me." He understood immediately. "Smart. I'll handle it." I spent the morning refreshing the docket page, taking notes in my precise prosecutor's handwriting. Bail amount, protective order conditions, next court date. Everything documented, everything tracked. The hearing itself unfolded with clinical precision, Victor told me later. Dewey stood before Judge Carmen Martinez in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, his public defender, a young woman Lula had scraped together money to hire, arguing he wasn't a flight risk. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets the incident," she said, her voice steady but her inexperience showing. "He has no prior record of violence, maintains steady employment, and has strong family support. $5,000 is appropriate, given—" Marcus Chen interrupted. The prosecutor handling Dewey's case was an old colleague, someone I'd mentored years ago when he was fresh out of law school. He still owed me for that. "The victim required emergency medical treatment for head trauma," Marcus said, his tone sharp. "The defendant threw a ceramic plate at close range. This wasn't an accident." He projected the medical photographs on the courtroom screen. My temple, bruised dark purple under harsh lighting, the swelling exaggerated by the camera angle. Dr. Chen's documentation was impeccable. Judge Martinez studied the images, then fixed Dewey with the look I remembered from cases I'd argued before her bench. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen countless domestic violence cases, "you will have no contact, direct or indirect, with Ellis Green. That means no phone calls, no texts, no messages through third parties. 200 meters minimum distance at all times. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dewey managed, his voice tight. "Bail is set at $12,000. Next hearing, January 15th. The gavel fell. Victor called immediately after. 12,000. Could have been worse for them. The protective order is what matters. He can't get near you, and any attempt is automatic contempt." "How did he look in court?" I asked. "Angry. Not scared enough yet, but we'll fix that." Over the next 2 days, Dewey's family scrambled. Beverly and Randall mortgaged their modest home, signing papers at a dingy bail bond office where a bored bondsman took their information without meeting their eyes. Beverly cried quietly while Randall stared at the wall, both aging visibly under the stress. They pawned their car, a 10-year-old sedan worth maybe $10,000, to cover the bond fee. Dewey walked free on December 2nd, emerging from Travis County Jail into cold winter sunshine. He'd lost weight. 3 days of jail food and stress had hollowed his face, made his eyes harder. Lula waited in a borrowed car, their own vehicle sitting in a pawnshop lot. Neither spoke during the drive to their apartment. I learned all this through Victor's network. Courthouse clerks, bondsmen who remembered favors owed, connections built over decades of legal work. That same afternoon, Victor filed the civil lawsuit. I'd reviewed every line of it the day before, making one small edit, increasing the medical expenses by $500 to account for ongoing headaches I'd documented at a follow-up appointment I'd strategically scheduled. Every detail mattered, every number defensible. $2,000 medical expenses, $23,000 pain and suffering, $50,000 punitive damages for malicious intent. Total, $75,000. The number was deliberately chosen, ruinous but not absurd, high enough to terrify them, low enough that a jury might actually award it. The process server delivered the complaint to their apartment that evening. Lula signed for it with shaking hands, opened the envelope while Dewey watched over her shoulder. The folder slipped from her fingers. Dewey read it off the floor, his face draining of color as reality crashed down. $75,000? His voice rose with each word. Where does he think we're supposed to get $75,000? Lula's voice came out near tears. He knows we don't have it. That's the point. He's trying to destroy us. My phone rang minutes later. Lula's number. I let it go to voicemail. She called 6 more times that evening, then started calling Victor's office. We didn't answer. In my study, I reviewed the documents one more time. The criminal case proceeding on its own track, arraignment, discovery, trial. The civil case opening a second front, applying financial pressure that would force decisions, create desperation. Desperation led to mistakes, and I was waiting for their mistakes. Victor called late that night. They're panicking, good. But Ellis, they're going to fight back. People this desperate, they'll try anything. Let them try, I said. I hung up and returned to my planning. The next phase required patience. I needed them to make their move before I made mine. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into it. The next morning, Lula was on the phone before I'd finished my coffee. Victor's contacts at the courthouse reported frantic activity, attorney consultations, desperate calls to legal aid services, borrowing money from everyone they knew. By noon, they'd scheduled meetings with 3 lawyers. By evening, they'd chosen Marcus Webb. I knew the name. Everyone in Austin legal circles knew Marcus Webb, a civil litigator in his early 50s with sharp suits and sharper tactics. The kind of attorney who'd argue black was white if you paid him enough, and make the jury almost believe it. He took their case after hearing their version. Victor learned the details through his network, how Dewey described me as cold and vindictive, how Lula tearfully recounted a childhood of emotional manipulation. The stories sounded rehearsed because Webb helped craft them during the consultation. "Here's what we do," Webb had told them, leaning back in his leather chair. "They want to play victim? We show the jury who the real victim is, a young woman trapped under her father's thumb, and a husband who finally stood up to a bully." "But we need proof," Lula started. "Your testimony is proof," Webb cut in. "You lived it." They borrowed $8,000 for his retainer, a high-interest loan Lula's damaged credit barely qualified for. Desperation made people say yes to terms they'd never normally accept. Webb spent 3 days preparing the countersuit. He interviewed Dewey's parents separately, asking leading questions with the practiced skill of someone who knew exactly how to walk the ethical line without crossing it. "Are you certain Ellis didn't say something provocative first?" he'd ask Beverly. "Could the plate have been thrown defensively?" he'd suggest to Randall. "Is it possible Ellis injured himself to frame Dewey?" The question planted like a seed, not telling them what to say, he was too experienced for that, but guiding them toward the version he needed, coaching their memories until uncertainty became certainty. "But at the police station, we said we saw Dewey throw the plate," Beverly protested weakly. "Won't changing our story now look bad?" Webb smiled reassuringly. "You were in shock that night. Now, with time to reflect, you remember more clearly. Memory works that way. It's perfectly legitimate." Lula signed her sworn statement at Webb's office on December 5th. The pen trembled slightly as she committed her father's alleged abuses to paper. Years of control, manipulation, emotional cruelty. Stories that were part truth, twisted into weapons, part complete fabrication. Webb's paralegal notarized the document while Webb watched approvingly, already planning how to use the daughter's testimony for maximum emotional impact. The countersuit hit the courthouse on December 6th. $50,000 in damages for Lula's lifetime of trauma, emotional abuse allegations, entrapment, deliberate provocation. Legal circles buzzed. A courthouse clerk called Victor with a warning. "Webb has a reputation for scorched earth litigation. He'll drag everything into discovery." Victor drove to my house that evening with printouts of Webb's filing and the revised witness statements. We sat in my study while he spread the documents across my desk, genuine worry visible on his face for the first time since this began. I read through the countersuit slowly, my prosecutor's eye catching every manipulated phrase and strategic lie. I made notes in the margins. Provably false. No corroboration. Contradicts police report. Victor paced, unusually animated. "Webb will subpoena every communication between you and Lula for the past decade. He'll depose friends, neighbors, anyone who might say you were controlling. He'll paint Thanksgiving as the culmination of years of abuse. I kept reading, calm. Ellis, your own daughter is accusing you of decades of psychological abuse, Victor continued. Even if we win, the damage to your reputation... Let him argue it, I said. Victor stopped pacing. You're not concerned? These are serious allegations. I set down the papers and met his eyes. I have an ace up my sleeve. Something Webb doesn't know about. Something even Dewey doesn't know I have. What kind of ace? 3 weeks ago, before I invited them for Thanksgiving, I took certain precautions. Documentation, recordings, evidence that proves exactly what Dewey and Lula were planning. Victor stared at me. You recorded them? Texas is a one-party consent state, I said. My house, my right. I'd installed the voice recorder 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Small device, high-quality audio, positioned in my living room where it could capture every conversation clearly. Legal under Texas law, I only needed one party's consent to record, and I was that party. I'd also activated the recording app on my phone during certain conversations, backed everything up to encrypted cloud storage through a contact who specialized in digital forensics. Everything preserved, everything time-stamped, everything admissible. What did you capture? Victor asked quietly. Dewey discussing his plans for my property, Lula agreeing to help convince me to move, specific dollar amounts they planned to extract. Their entire scheme, in their own words, recorded weeks before Thanksgiving. Victor sat down slowly. Why didn't you tell me? I needed to see how far they'd go first, I said. If Dewey had just made verbal demands and left it at that, I might have let it go. But he threw that plate, and now Lula's committed perjury in a sworn statement. I pulled a folder from my desk drawer. Transcripts of the recordings printed and organized. Dates, times, speakers identified. Webb thinks he's flipping the narrative, I continued. He thinks Lula's testimony will muddy the waters enough to create reasonable doubt. What he doesn't know is that I can prove, with their own voices, that they were scheming to take my house before Thanksgiving ever happened. Victor took the folder, scanned the first few pages. His expression shifted from worry to something approaching admiration. This changes everything, he said. That's the idea. When do we play this card? Not yet, I said. Let Webb commit. Let them spend more money on legal fees. Let Dewey's parents mortgage themselves further. Let Lula dig deeper into her lies under oath during depositions. Victor nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. And then we produce the recordings. Show the judge that everything they've claimed is provably false. Watch their entire case collapse. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the satisfaction of a plan coming together. Webb's good, I said, but he's walking into a trap, and he doesn't even know it. The morning after Victor and I reviewed the recordings, I drove downtown to meet Thomas Brennan for coffee. The cafe was quiet, tucked away from the business district, the kind of place where conversations stayed private. Brennan had aged well, mid-60s now, still sharp-eyed, still careful. I'd cleared his name 12 years ago when someone stole his identity and racked up fraudulent charges. He remembered. Ellis, he said, shaking my hand. Been a long time. Too long. I need a favor. We talked for 40 minutes about hypothetical family situations and financial stress indicators. Brennan read between the lines like I knew he would. He slid a folder across the table. Public records only. Credit scores, liens, foreclosure notices, all accessible if you know where to look. I didn't open it until I was back in my car, engine running, reading by overhead light. The numbers told a story more damning than any testimony. Dewey carried $45,000 in combined credit card and auto loan debt. His credit score had plummeted 100 points in 6 months, multiple missed payments, collection agencies circling. But the revelation that made everything crystallize, a business loan pre-approval from Texas Capital Bank, contingent on property collateral worth at least $500,000. My house was valued at $580,000. I flipped to the next page. Randall and Beverly Parker, $30,000 in medical debt from Randall's heart surgery 2 years prior. Mounting interest. Minimum payments they could barely afford. The last page was a photocopy of Dewey's business plan, incomplete, but enough to see. Plans for a used car dealership, projected monthly expenses, and a line item that made my jaw tighten. Rental income from collateral property, $3,500 a month. My property, rented out to service their debts while I lived in some efficiency apartment, displaced from the home I'd built. It was never about family, never about helping elderly parents. Pure calculation, pure greed. I called Victor immediately. 2 days later, on December 10th, Victor filed a discovery motion. Financial records, he argued, were directly relevant. If Dewey was financially motivated to seize my property, it undermined Webb's entire narrative of a loving son-in-law defending family. Webb fought back with a flurry of objections. Irrelevant, overly broad, invasion of privacy. Judge Martinez heard the arguments via phone conference. I listened on Victor's speakerphone, hearing Webb's increasingly desperate tone as Martinez cut through his objections. "Counselor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd presided over too many cases, where money hid beneath family rhetoric. If your client was financially motivated to pressure Mr. Green for property, that's directly relevant to the assault and the counterclaims. Motion granted. 48 hours to comply. Webb's silence spoke volumes. Dewey spent a frantic day gathering documents. I imagined him and Lula at their kitchen table, organizing bank statements, both knowing what the numbers would reveal. Webb reviewed the materials before submission. He must have realized then that his client's story was collapsing. The courier delivered a sealed envelope to Victor's office on December 12th. We spread the contents across his conference table. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan applications, business plan drafts. Victor traced entries with his finger. Look at this. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Dewey applied for the business loan. The application lists family property in Tarrytown as proposed collateral. Premeditation, I said. He was planning this before he had the house. It destroys his impulsive anger defense. Victor flipped to another page. And here, Google search history from the loan application site. Home equity loan maximum. Rental income calculator. Texas property transfer family member. I found the text message thread between Dewey and someone named Marcus, his business partner apparently. My father-in-law's house is the key to funding, Dewey had written on November 8th. Just need to convince him it's the right move. Lula's working on him. November 8th, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Victor set down the papers. This isn't a family dispute. It's a business transaction that went violent when you refused to cooperate. And now we have proof, I said. I thought about Dewey's performance at Thanksgiving dinner, the talk of family obligations, Beverly's tears, Randall's sympathetic looks. All theater, all manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for not surrendering my home to solve their financial crisis. The business plan was 18 pages long. Dewey had spent real time on it, projecting revenue, calculating overhead, planning for success. And at the center of it all, my house as the foundation, the collateral, the income stream. He'd counted on my guilt, my love for Lula, my sense of family duty. What he hadn't counted on was that I'd spent 30 years prosecuting people who wore masks, who wrapped cruelty in noble language, who stole while claiming virtue. I knew the patterns, knew how to read the lies. Victor made copies of everything organized by category: financial desperation, business planning, timeline of premeditation, each piece of evidence tagged and indexed. Webb's going to have a hard time explaining this away, Victor said. He can't, I replied. The numbers don't lie, and when we add the recordings to this financial evidence, their entire case evaporates. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. Let them commit further. Let Webb dig deeper into his false narrative. Let Dewey and Lula sink more money into legal fees they couldn't afford. The trap kept getting tighter, and they kept walking deeper into it. I drove home that evening with copies of the financial documents on my passenger seat, evidence of what people would do when desperation mixed with entitlement, when they believed their needs justified taking what wasn't theirs. But the financial desperation was only half the story. What I learned next made the assault look like a minor offense. A week earlier, on December 5th, the same day Webb filed his countersuit, I'd made a call to Rachel Torres, private investigator, former FBI fraud specialist, the kind of person who knew how to dig beneath surfaces and find what people worked hard to hide. My instinct tells me the assault is part of something larger. I told her over the phone. I need to know what I'm really dealing with. She'd taken the case. On the morning of December 13th, Torres arrived at my house carrying a leather portfolio. She was compact, late 40s, with the direct gaze of someone who'd spent years interviewing liars. Her expression was grim. We sat at my dining table, and she spread documents across the surface. Copies of a power of attorney form, a medical evaluation, timeline evidence showing website access logs. Your son-in-law accessed LegalZoom on November 10th, she said, tapping the first page. Downloaded a Texas power of attorney template. 3 days later, someone using his computer searched Texas dementia, diagnosis requirements, and guardianship without consent. My hands remained steady as I read, but anger built behind my ribs like pressure. Then on November 20th, Torres continued, they created this. She slid across a medical evaluation form. Dr. Andrew Mitchell's name at the top, his signature at the bottom, or what was supposed to be his signature. The diagnosis, moderate to severe dementia. Recommendation, immediate guardianship required for patient safety. I'd seen Dr. Mitchell 3 months ago for my annual physical. Clean bill of health. Sharp mind. No cognitive issues whatsoever. The signature's fake, I said, comparing it mentally to the one on my actual medical records at home. Amateur work, Torres confirmed. Dr. Mitchell confirmed he never wrote this letter, never diagnosed you with dementia. The forger didn't even match the signature correctly. Wrong pen pressure, inconsistent letter formation. I set the document down carefully. They were going to have me declared incompetent. Then petition for guardianship, Torres said. Take control of your assets for your protection. After that, they could liquidate or leverage the house however they wanted. You'd have no legal standing to stop them. The coldness of it, the calculation, not just greed, but theft dressed as concern. Elder abuse wrapped in filial duty. How far did they get with this? I asked. Drafts only. They never filed. I think Thanksgiving was supposed to be about getting you to sign voluntarily. When you refused, they had this as backup. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I drove to the Austin Police Department Central Station. Detective Morgan met me in an interview room, her expression shifting from curiosity to hardening resolve, as I presented Torres's findings alongside my actual medical records. They forged medical documents, I said, my voice controlled fury. Attempted fraud, identity theft. This goes way beyond the assault. Morgan studied the signature comparison, the computer search history, the timeline. When she looked up, her eyes held the focused determination of someone who just realized she was looking at a felony case. I need to brief the DA, she said, but this is enough for a search warrant. Computer, documents, anything related to the forgery. She worked late that night, drafting the warrant affidavit, called the on-duty judge at home for approval. By midnight, the warrant was signed electronically. The raid was scheduled for first light December 16th. 4 officers arrived at Dewey and Lula's apartment before dawn. I wasn't there. Morgan kept me away deliberately, protecting the case, but she briefed me afterward. Dewey answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, demanding to know what was happening. "We have a warrant," the lead officer said, pushing past him. They carried out a desktop computer, 2 laptops, file boxes filled with papers. Neighbors watched from windows. The real discovery came in a folder labeled Dad's Health in Lula's handwriting. Printouts of the forged documents, draft versions, notes about which doctor to impersonate. An officer photographed Lula's face when they found it. Morgan described it to me later. Color draining, eyes widening, the look of someone who just realized the trap had closed. Digital forensics moved fast. By afternoon, they'd reconstructed everything. Multiple drafts of the power of attorney saved on Dewey's computer, created over several days. Browser searches, how to forge medical documents, guardianship in Texas, signature practice. Downloads of Dr. Mitchell's actual signature from insurance forms. They'd pulled it from a PDF Ellis had emailed them months ago about his health coverage. Email exchanges between Dewey and Lula. Getting the paperwork ready before Thanksgiving, one read. Once we have the guardianship, we can move fast on the house, another said. Premeditation, conspiracy. Felony forgery under Texas Penal Code. Section 3221. Morgan interviewed them separately at the station. Dewey tried justification first. I was just exploring options for Ellis's future care. He's getting older, and we wanted to be prepared. Mr. Parker, Morgan interrupted, your computer shows you researched how to forge medical documents, downloaded power of attorney forms, created multiple drafts. The timeline shows this began 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Long pause. Then, I want my attorney. Lula cried through her interview, but offered no alternative explanation. Just tears and silence, and the slow realization that her participation had made her an accomplice to a felony. Dewey was arrested for the second time on December 16th, late afternoon. Felony forgery, attempted fraud, identity theft. Lula was named as an accomplice but not immediately arrested. Prosecutor's strategy, using her potential charges as leverage for testimony. Bail was set at $50,000. They couldn't pay it. Their car was already pawned. Dewey's parents had mortgaged their house for the first bail. Credit maxed out. No assets left to leverage. Dewey spent his second night in Travis County Jail. But this time, there was no bail money coming. No rescue. Just the cold reality of consequences catching up. I sat in my study that evening reviewing the case file Victor had compiled. 2 charges now, assault and felony forgery. Civil lawsuit, countersuit crumbling under the weight of exposed lies, and I still hadn't revealed the recordings. The prosecutor and me knew when to hold cards and when to play them. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. Let Dewey sit in jail. Let Lula contemplate her choices. Let Webb realize his clients had lied to him about everything. Let them understand, finally, that you don't try to steal from someone who spent 30 years putting criminals behind bars. The game was nearly over. They just didn't know it yet. Dewey spent 5 days in Travis County Jail, unable to make the $50,000 bail that stretched impossibly beyond his family's grasp. Victor kept me updated with daily phone calls, each one reporting another desperate counteroffer. From Webb, each one more revealing than the last. They can't win at trial, Victor told me on December 18th. Webb knows it. The digital forensics are ironclad. The financial motive is documented. Your medical records prove you're completely competent. He's trying to salvage whatever he can. What's he offering? Everything we wanted. Guilty plea to both charges. Restitution. Protective order. It's just a matter of finalizing terms. Lula sold her car on December 17th. A Honda Accord worth $12,000 that she'd loved. Always kept clean. Always maintained. She drove it to a used car lot on Ben White Boulevard and stood in the dusty office, while a dealer with dead eyes offered her $8,000. The car's worth at least $12,000, she said, her voice tight. Maybe if you had time to wait for the right buyer. The dealer counted bills with practiced indifference. But you don't have time, do you? She signed the title over with tears streaking her face, removed her registration and insurance cards from the glove box, dropped them in a plastic bag she didn't look inside. $8,000. Still not enough. Randall and Beverly visited a lender on December 18th, the kind of place with neon signs in the window and interest rates that skirt legality. They signed papers for a home equity loan against the modest house they'd owned for 30 years, securing another $25,000. Beverly's hands shook so badly that Randall had to guide the pen. Together they'd scraped $33,000, $17,000 short of bail. Webb delivered the reality to Dewey in a jail conference room on December 19th, spreading papers across a scarred metal table while a guard watched from the corner. "Take the plea," Webb said, his voice flat with exhaustion. 3 years probation is a gift compared to what the judge will give you at trial. 5 to 10 years in state prison for felony forgery alone. You walk out of here today on probation or you go to trial and lose years. Dewey read through the agreement twice. And the money? $45,000 in restitution. $1,250 a month for 3 years. Webb paused. It's manageable. Both of them knew it wasn't. The plea hearing on December 20th was brief and clinical. I didn't attend, maintaining distance, letting the system complete its work. But Victor texted me at the moment Dewey signed the agreement. It's done. I was at home, making coffee, reading the newspaper. The text arrived and I set down my cup, feeling the weight of finality settle. Judge Martinez asked Dewey the required questions. Mr. Parker, you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting you assaulted Ellis Green and forged documents intended to defraud him of his property and autonomy. Yes, Your Honor. Dewey's voice was flat, hollowed out. And you understand, this plea means 3 years supervised probation, 200 hours community service, and $45,000 in restitution? I understand. The prosecutor read the factual basis, every detail of the assault, the forged medical documents, the attempted fraud. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. In the gallery, Lula flinched when the prosecutor mentioned her participation as an accomplice. Beverly Parker buried her face in Randall's shoulder. Lula received 1 year probation for her role in the forgery, lighter sentence for lesser involvement, but still a criminal record, still consequences that would follow her. Victor emailed me a scanned copy of the court order within an hour. I read it in my study, noting every term, every condition, every requirement. 3 years supervised probation, 200 hours community service, 5-year protective order. Dewey couldn't come within 200 meters of me, and the restitution, $1,250 monthly for 36 months. I filed the document in a folder labeled simply Resolution. By December 22nd, the reality settled over them like concrete. Dewey's income as a car salesman, commission-based, variable, never guaranteed, would barely cover his own expenses. Add Lula's needs, the restitution payments, the debt service to his parents, and the math collapsed into impossibility. Randall received a foreclosure notice 3 days before Christmas. They had 90 days to pay the full balance of the home equity loan. They didn't have it, would never have it. We were trying to help our son, Randall told Beverly as they sat at their kitchen table reading the notice. And now we're losing everything. She cried quietly, the kind of tears that come from exhaustion rather than shock. The financial destruction was complete, systematic, inevitable. Dewey, criminal record, probation, crushing restitution debt, 5 years forbidden from approaching me. Lula, criminal record, probation, car sold for desperation money, marriage to a man who destroyed her family. Dewey's parents, home facing foreclosure, savings depleted, retirement security gone. All of it traceable back to one Thanksgiving dinner, one plan to take what wasn't theirs, one act of violence when I refused to surrender. I defended my home, secured my autonomy, ensured justice was served through the system I'd spent 30 years working within. The prosecutor in me felt satisfaction. The father in me felt nothing but the cold knowledge that sometimes winning meant losing everything that mattered. I sat in my study that evening, the house silent except for the furnace cycling warm air through vents. On my desk, the court order, the protective order, the restitution schedule. Everything I'd fought for, everything I'd won. And the price, my daughter, transformed from the girl who once trusted me into a woman who'd forged documents to steal my freedom. I didn't regret it, couldn't afford to. Some betrayals don't allow for reconciliation, only consequences. The case was closed. The victory was mine, and it tasted exactly like I'd known it would. Necessary, just, and bitter as ash. Christmas Eve morning arrived cold. One of those rare Austin winter days when Texas pretends to be somewhere north, temperature hovering just above freezing, the air sharp enough to sting. I made coffee in my kitchen, the same routine I'd followed for 30 years. Grinder whirring, water boiling, morning light slanting through windows I'd chosen in a house I'd earned. The silence felt larger than usual. Not oppressive, liberating. My space, my terms. No Dewey calculating rental income potential. No Lula avoiding my eyes while plotting with her husband. Just me and the life I'd built, defended, and kept. Victor called late morning, his voice warm with professional satisfaction. "Merry Christmas, Ellis," or as merry as it can be under the circumstances. "You did what you had to do." "We did what we had to do," I said. "Your work was flawless." The restitution payments start January 1st. First check should arrive by the 15th. If he misses any payments, we can pursue additional remedies. I don't care about the money. I meant it. I want him to remember every month for 3 years that actions have consequences. We talked for 15 minutes about case strategy, about the textbook precision of the evidence chain, about how the system had worked exactly as designed when given proper preparation. Then Victor asked the question I'd been expecting. Will you reach out to Lula eventually? I looked out my study window at bare branches against gray sky. Maybe, when she understands what she did. Not just that she lost, but why it was wrong. That might take years. Fair enough, Victor said. Enjoy your day, Ellis. You've earned the peace. After he hung up, I organized the legal documents into a file box labeled Parker Case Closed, placed it on a high shelf in my study where it would remain as reference but not constant reminder. The physical act of filing away the papers provided closure. Done. Finished. Resolved. I made lunch, turkey sandwich, leftover soup, and ate alone at the kitchen table. Deliberate solitude, not loneliness. I was reclaiming the peace that had been invaded, the quiet that was mine by right. My phone buzzed after lunch. Text from Lula. Dad, I'm sorry. I was foolish. I read it 3 times. Foolish. Not I was cruel. Not I was wrong. Not I betrayed you. Just foolish. Like a miscalculation. Like betting on the wrong horse. I set the phone face down on the table. Poured coffee. Drank it slowly. Read the text again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I set the phone down without responding. The decision wasn't impulsive. I'd spent weeks thinking about this moment, knowing it would come. Lula reaching out, prompted by consequences rather than understanding. Fear rather than remorse. Maybe someday I'd forgive her. Maybe years from now, when she'd truly grasped what she'd done, not just to me, but to herself, to Dewey's parents, to the person she used to be. Not today, not yet. Maybe never. I opened my desk drawer and retrieved an old photograph. Lula at 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, pigtails held with bright ribbons, clutching a trophy from her school spelling bee. That child had trusted me completely, believed I'd always protect her, and I had protected her, maybe for too long. Protected her from consequences until she thought she could take everything from me without facing any. I held the photograph in both hands, allowing myself a moment of genuine grief. Not for the woman who'd forged documents and conspired to have me declared incompetent, for the girl who'd become that woman. Then I returned the photograph to the drawer and closed it with quiet finality. As afternoon faded to evening, I walked through my house. The same route Dewey had walked on Thanksgiving night. Through the dining room where he'd thrown the plate, past the living room where he'd paced, calculating, into the kitchen where I'd gripped the counter, preparing myself for confrontation. Every room mine, every possession earned through 30 years of honest work, every corner secure. I'd prosecuted criminals for 3 decades, learned to read lies, to follow money, to build cases brick by documented brick. When my own family tried to steal from me, I'd used every skill I'd honed in those courtrooms. The system had worked. Justice had been served. Crimes had been punished proportionally. And I'd lost my daughter in the process. I sat in my chair by the front window as evening approached, watching occasional cars pass on Windsor Road, not waiting for anything, just present in my space, in the victory that tasted like ash and satisfaction in equal measure. The Thanksgiving dinner had cost Dewey his freedom, his reputation, his financial stability. It cost his parents their home. It cost Lula her relationship with her father. It cost me the daughter I'd raised. I didn't regret it, couldn't afford to. Some betrayals carve too deep for reconciliation. Some lessons can only be taught through consequences that last. 30 years of prosecuting criminals had taught me that justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's necessary destruction. Sometimes it's defending what's yours against people who believed family ties meant they could take without asking, hurt without facing punishment. My house stood secure, my autonomy intact, my life my own again. The documents on the side table told the story. Protective order valid for 5 years, restitution payments guaranteed for 3, criminal records permanent. Dewey and Lula would remember this for the rest of their lives. Every monthly payment, every probation check-in, every application that asked about criminal history. I'd made sure of that. Outside, winter darkness settled over Tarrytown. Lights came on in neighboring houses where families gathered for the holiday. I stayed in my chair, alone in the home I'd defended, victorious in a war that had destroyed everything except the ground I'd held. The silence wrapped around me like armor. I'd won. The price was steep, but I'd paid it knowingly. And sitting there in the gathering dark, I felt what I'd expected to feel all along. Not triumph, not joy, just the cold satisfaction of a man who'd done what was necessary and refused to apologize for it. Some victories don't come with celebration. They come with quiet and certainty, and the knowledge that you protected what mattered most. I had my house, I had my freedom, I had my peace. Everything else was gone, and I'd made that choice with open eyes. No regrets? Not one. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.